enter here.
I've grown up in eastern Kentucky since the age of 1. My family, both sides, have grown up in the rural Appalachias their whole lives. But, as with modern times, moved to the small town nestled here in the valley, situated between rolling hills and deep ridgelines. Where the following stories take place is a rural area nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It's got a name and it's considered a county. However, the area where my dad's family grew up in, where these stories come from, is more like a collection of deep ridges and mountain folks than anything else. Just to clear up any confusion that this is an actual town. During the early days of the settlers, these mountains were home to the Cherokee Indians. Many cemeteries in this area actually have around 30 to 40 graves of Native Americans buried there, marked with stones and rocks, rather than a more traditional Indian burial routine. In the 1800s, George Washington's aide-de-camp, Colonial Grayson, was bestowed a 70,000-acre piece of land which now is where my town is located. In the 1970s or 80s, my mum and her aunt, along with her small cousins, were driving down an empty road just outside of town. When they came to the top of a hill where an abandoned farmhouse stood, they stopped their car in its tracks. They saw a massive saucer-shaped craft hovering over the house. Frightened, my mother and her aunt booked it out of there at high speed. Scared, they continued down the mountain, back to town. However, when they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the craft coming after them at a high rate of speed, tailing their car and keeping up with it. They attempted to evade the craft multiple times, but to no avail. It chased them for over a mile back to town until finally, just at the edge of the county road that leads back into town, it finally disappeared. My mother has told this story at least 100 times to family and friends, most of which believe her, as they too have seen strange lights in the sky in and around various areas of the community, though some don't. She drew me a picture of the spacecraft a few years ago, which I still have. It's grey and almost metallic looking. It has red lights on all edges of the bottom of the craft, along with a few green lights on the sides of it. When my mother was a child, old enough to know when something is going on, she was at home with her parents and siblings one night. A man, whom her mother and family already knew and were acquainted with, barged into the house, scared out of his wits. He lived in a cabin deep within the woods some miles away. During his stay there, he reported poltergeist activity, orbs and paranormal activity within the property and the house itself. He would go on to tell my grandmother that reportedly he was tormented all night by a demon who threw pots and pans, glasses, and even furniture at him. This went on for almost the entire night. It would throw them completely out of the cabinets, almost hitting. It also repeatedly started knocking and tapping on the sides of his house, as well as thumping the walls and ceiling. Finally, he mustered up the nerves to utter the Lord's Prayer and attempt to rebuke it in the name of Jesus Christ. This seemed to piss it off even more and caused it to become even more aggressive. Now, it started trying to kill him with heavier objects. He ran from the house and spent around 7 to 8 hours walking through the woods and rural country roads back to my grandmother's house. While on his way to the house, he reported that he could hear footsteps trailing him in the woods and next to the road, but he couldn't see anything. It continued on like this for several hours until he finally reached their house. In the 90s, in town sat a white brick house at the top of a small hill. A man and his wife lived there for several years. The man was in his 40s or 50s, and the woman somewhere around the same age, I believe. Anyways, one day while my mother was working at a local gas station, where the woman also coincidentally worked at, the man called her, saying something was wrong with the gas in the house, and he was going to look at it to see if he could fix it. The gas was located in the basement. He went downstairs, lay on his back, and crawled up under the thing to see what had happened. He lit a match to see better, and immediately the house exploded, sending rubble everywhere and a massive fireball. Smoke could be seen throughout the town. The man's wife, who saw the explosion from the gas station, ran home to discover the house gone and nothing left but its foundations. The man's body, as one might expect in a situation like this, was blown into pieces, with body parts even littering some neighboring houses. Since then, it has become a local legend that the man's spirit haunts the house that was built on the land where the original one stood. The show, Ghost Hunters, or maybe another ghost hunting TV series, actually filmed an episode here because of the experiences by the home's inhabitants. Everything from pots and pans rattling and stuff being thrown around to actual manifestations inside the residence. Where my dad's family lives is up in a series of ridges and hollows that, for the sake of this entry, I will call Webb, Kentucky. My dad's entire lineage has lived there since the 1800s. I have looked into our family tree and it is chock full of history. From an old one-armed Irishman who built the 2-story log cabin where my father's family grew up in, to Native American heritage. The following story takes place at my uncle's house, which is the 2-story log cabin built by said Irishman. My uncle died in 2010 of a massive heart attack on his porch. Since then, it sat empty most of the time, except for my aunt, my grandma's sister, staying there during the spring and summer. The house itself has had a history of paranormal activity, from disembodied footsteps coming from the upstairs rooms to voices and apparitions. My whole life, my dad and his sisters and brothers had always sworn that the house was haunted by the spirits of my great-grandparents, the one-armed man who built the property, and possibly even my late uncle who died there. But that isn't the only thing that has happened there. Somewhere around the late 90s to early 2000s, my uncle, who loved spending time out in the woods coon hunting with his pack of hunting dogs, was out one night on one of his nightly hunts. According to my aunt, who heard the story from my uncle, who retold it to my grandparents later on, he was in the woods when something chased him out with great success. He said he could hear bipedal walking, trailing him in the woods. His coonhounds, who were akin to predators, seemed frightened and wouldn't chase after whatever it was. He fled through the woods as he heard whatever it was chasing him from behind. He barely made it home by the skin of his teeth, as whatever it was chased him all the way back to his property. He retold the story to my family a few weeks later while visiting. My uncle, Dad's eldest brother, had moved back to the mountains after some years away in the nearby city. The family kept up with him from time to time, but he seemed to be doing quite well. Unfortunately, however, in mid to late 2016, he was diagnosed with incurable lung cancer and was given only a few short months to a year to live. Seeing as how he didn't want to die in the city, he decided to move back to the hills of home. He spent a little while trying to find a suitable house or trailer to move his family back into. After a while, he finally found one, nestled on a very steep hill, with a gravel road leading up the hill to the house. It sat surrounded by dense dark woods, and a backyard that was walled off by a massive rock face, with even more woods surrounding it. The house was what I would describe as a log cabin type build, with light brown wood covering the outside, and tin or shingled roof. It even had a small hot tub off to the side of the small porch, but it had not been used in quite some time. However, that wasn't the strangest part of the property. In the front yard, in a medium-sized garden that the previous owners had made, sat a grave. Yes, a real grave. It was of a stillborn infant baby, a fetus, who had died in the 1970s or 80s, and had been buried there ever since. I found that extremely odd and unnerving, but the inside of the house didn't fare much better either. Whoever had lived there previously must have left in a hurry, as they left all their belongings behind. A TV, little girls' clothes, dishes were left on the kitchen table. Bed frames were taped together in the bedrooms with only the bedrolls themselves being taken, and a Minnie Mouse TV stuffed into a closet of a back bedroom. And in the backyard was the strangest sight of all. A massive burn pile, made up of furniture and pieces of other objects and personal effects, all scorched and burned black, with a giant circle of black surrounding the pile, signified by a black outline in the dirt. The whole house had a very eerie and creepy vibe to it, like something was wrong there. Very wrong. My father, as a promise to his dying brother, starting work on the house, immediately arranging for satellite TV to be hooked up in the living room, which is where my uncle and his family were forced to sleep while work was underway elsewhere in the house. However, soon this happy abode turned into a living hell. Sleeping in the living room, you would hear footsteps walking across the wooden floors. Doors would open and close by themselves, and shadows were seen. My uncle started seeing a small boy and older man, both in overalls and straw hats, who, after a while there, would torment him, even up to his dying day. His wife, who thought he was going crazy, never knew anything odd was happening. That was until, while at the kitchen sink, she saw the boy in overalls running past the kitchen window. Going outside, nothing was there. After that, his daughter soon started experiencing the oddness of the property. She told her mother that she had been playing with a boy in her room just a short time ago. When going to see what was going on, nothing was there. My uncle was continuously tormented by these spirits, even locking my family, who went to visit him, in the back bedroom out of fear that they would hurt them. Eventually, however, they were forced to finally flee the home, having been run out by all the aggressive activity inside the home. My uncle did eventually pass away in 2017, but the entire time he was there, at the home, he was tormented by the restless spirits of the man and boy. After his death, the family pastor and another preacher went to the property and blessed it, attempting to banish the dark entities haunting the home. They threw holy water on the walls and front and back doors, and ordered the spirits out in the name of Jesus Christ. After that, no one knows for sure if the property ever had any odd activity again. My father would stay the nights at my grandmother's when she was still alive. She died in 2018. Most of the time he would stay with her because she was afraid of the nighttime. She had some form of sundowners and would see and hear things at night, so he stayed to calm some of her nerves at night. This particular night her sister was visiting for the week. He decided to go up and hang out with them for a while and stay the night. Well, at about midnight, or sometime after that, he was awoken by the sound of the garbage being gone through, and a loud thump, as whatever it was, had knocked the lid off the trash can, causing a loud commotion that had woke my aunt and grandmother. As they got my dad up to investigate, whatever the disturbance was out back. Grabbing my grandfather's old shotgun and a flashlight, he opened up the back door and walked out to investigate. Having seen the trash can lid and that the trash can had been gone through, he walked further out, through the back area, to see if anything was out there. And that's when he saw it. Walking back up the hill and back into the woods was a very large and very tall creature in white, with large red eyes reflecting the light from the flashlight bouncing off it. The creature watched him the entire time as it walked back up into the woods, and then vanished. My dad walked back inside, white from what he had just seen, pale as a ghost. My aunt tried to ask what had happened, and that is when he told her and called my mum on the house phone. Relaying the encounter, my mother had my stepbrother ready to find any odd encounters from the area, and he found one. A man had reported being followed in the woods while he was walking down that same stretch of road one day. He never saw anything, but it was walking with him every step. It was later discovered that there is a legend about the devil himself haunting the woods of the mountains there. My dad and myself went to the rural country cemetery, located in the bowels of the mountains. This cemetery has been there for at least 80 to 90 years. The cemetery sits on a small hill with a very steep road going up, and only a very good truck with four-wheel drive or an off-roading vehicle can get there. It is located in between a four-way, with only one home, a double-wide trailer, located down the hill. It has been empty and for sale for about a year or two, and was empty during the time of our visit. It has a fence encircling it, and 2 pine trees sitting in the middle of it. That is where my family is buried at. My grandmother and grandfather are both buried there, as well as also my uncle, who had the haunted cabin in the previous story. His ashes are buried there at the foot of my grandfather's vault. 3 other aunts and an uncle are also buried there, as well as my great-grandparents. We got out and went in through the chain-locked gate that you have to pull apart and open from the outside. We sat there at the grave of my grandparents for about 20 to 30 minutes, talking. We sometimes like to walk around the grounds for a little bit before we headed back to town, and today was no different. We walked around looking at the graves from the 17 and 1800s, as well as Cherokee graves marked by rocks at the very back of the cemetery. However, I found something odd on the ground by the flat grave marker of a grave from the 1800s. It was a large, bare footprint, at least 2 times larger than my own. I sat there stunned by what I was seeing. Its big toe was extremely large and round, in the shape of a quarter. Perfectly round. Its arch was very broad and curved very sharply, making the rest of the foot almost look sideways in appearance. Whatever it was there the night prior passing through. I inspected the ground surrounding the rest of the cemetery and saw nothing else. No other tracks, nothing. When I got home, I told my mother what had happened. She seemed to believe me and my father, considering I never had lied about or seen anything like that before, and she could see the amazement on my face. Sometime later, my aunt happened to be visiting, and I told her about the track I had found, and what she told me was very creepy. She told me that when my other uncle, my father's other brother, was out there visiting the graves years prior, he had come home and said that something was in the cemetery. He said he had felt watched and was very creeped out, being alone back there. When my grandmother died in the early winter of 2018, my aunt and uncle moved into her trailer until they could secure a new home and move back from Tennessee to be closer to family. Many people who stayed the night there while my grandmother was alive would swear that my grandfather's spirit, who died of cancer under hospice care in a trailer years prior, was haunting the residents. Strange footsteps in the night, voices, and knocking on the trailer walls would always be reported. My father had even encountered said oddities. The knocking would come from outside, and when looking outside or stepping out there with a gun, nothing was ever there. Prior to my grandmother's passing, my father's only living brother had come to visit her one evening. He said that he had seen my grandfather standing by her with his arm around her and said,
"Son, I'm going to see your mother very, very soon,"
and then vanished. And my grandmother did join him a few months later. That was when my aunt and uncle had moved in. Afterwards, nothing strange happened yet. Eventually, they had found a suitable new home to move into, and on a cold winter's night, in the dead of night with the power to the trailer being cut, as you would expect, given them moving, the power bill didn't need to be paid. We arrived at the home and began moving them out. Boxes of clothes, TV, couch and beds, all loaded into the U-Haul parked in the front yard with the engine running and the keys in the ignition. Suddenly, every light source we had helping us to see suddenly went out. The flashlight we had hung on the front porch facing the front door went out, and the U-Haul's engine completely died. We went back out and turned them back on. However, a few minutes later, it did it again. Everything went black. That is when I started being followed around while inside the rooms of the trailer. I felt like someone was following me around, and I swear at times I would hear a female voice saying, "Hi," as well as a male spirit, which was also heard by my father while in the living room. This continued on, and finally, after everything was loaded into the U-Haul, we regrouped outside getting ready to leave. We were talking out in the front yard, and I swear I could hear someone walking across the hardwood floors in the home. We left a few minutes later. A new family moved in after doing some renovations to the trailer a few months later, and as far as we know, no other paranormal activity has been reported since. My brother and his friend were deer hunting in some woods up in the area close to his home. This was multiple years ago, so nothing recent. They were going through the woods with their guns when, suddenly, they spot something up in a tree, watching them. This thing jumps from the high vantage point. It's at around 10 or 20 feet high and falls all the way down to the ground below without being seriously injured. It was covered in thick, matted hair, and it was on 2 legs. They aimed their guns at it, but the thing screamed at them, though he considered it more like a roar, and charged them. They ran out of the woods as fast as they could. This thing chased them for quite some time before they finally lost it and got back home in one piece. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.